Millionaire found 3 abandoned children behind his restaurant. When he looked at their hands, Chicago's winter dawn painted the city in shades of gray, where the grand facade of the Founder's Table stood proudly against the biting December wind. Arthur Stanley, heir to his mother's legacy, adjusted his wool coat and watched his breath cloud in the frigid morning air. The restaurant, with its brass lettering and immaculate windows, represented everything his mother had built from nothing, a beacon of culinary excellence in the city's upscale dining scene. But this morning would shatter the carefully maintained order of his world. The sound came first, a muffled whimper carried on the wind, so faint he almost missed it. Behind the restaurant, near the steam vent where the kitchen's warmth escaped into the alley, sat a large cardboard box. It might have been trash, like so much else discarded in the city's back streets, but something about its placement caught Arthur's trained eye. As he approached, the box shifted slightly. A pair of eyes, dark, frightened, and unmistakably human, peered out from a torn edge. Arthur's breath caught in his throat as he carefully pulled back the damp cardboard. What he found struck him harder than any business setback ever could. 3 children huddled together for warmth, their small bodies pressed against each other. The oldest, a girl no more than 7, glared at him with fierce protectiveness, her arms wrapped around a trembling boy and a barely conscious toddler. But it was what he saw on their wrists that made his blood run cold. Identical marks, like Brand's triangles with the letter V. The Founder's Table wasn't just a restaurant, it was a testament to the American dream. Its polished oak panels and crystal chandeliers reflected decades of dedication, starting with Eleanor Stanley's first borrowed dollar. Arthur walked through the dining room each morning, touching each perfectly aligned chair, straightening already straight tablecloths, a ritual his mother had performed for 30 years before him. The December morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the herringbone floors. In the kitchen, the morning staff moved with practiced precision, the gentle clink of china and silverware creating a symphony he knew by heart. Chef Marcus, who'd worked alongside Eleanor for 20 years, nodded respectfully as Arthur passed. The aroma of freshly baked sourdough, Eleanor's secret recipe, filled the air. Mr. Stanley Sarah, the morning manager, approached with a stack of paperwork. The health inspectors coming at 10, and the wine shipment from Napa is delayed. Her efficiency reminded him of his mother. Also, Mr. Foster's office called again about the buyout offer. Arthur's jaw tightened at the mention of Vincent Foster. Same answer as always, Sarah. The Founder's Table isn't for sale. He paused by the kitchen door, watching the prep cook slice vegetables with military precision. This place isn't just real estate, it's a legacy. The restaurant had changed since Eleanor's passing 3 years ago. Arthur had modernized the menu, added a craft cocktail program, earned another Michelin star. But he'd kept the heart of the place intact, the warmth, the hospitality, the sense that every guest was family. The old regulars still came for Eleanor's apple tart, always served warm with vanilla bean ice cream melting on top. Caroline Watson, owner of the cafe next door, often said the Founder's Table was like a lighthouse in the neighborhood, a beacon of stability in changing times. She'd known Eleanor too, had watched Arthur grow from a boy doing homework at the corner table to the man who now carried his mother's dream forward. The dining room could seat 200, but Arthur knew every table's story. Table 7, where the Hendersons had celebrated their 50th anniversary. Table 12, where Judge Morrison proposed to his wife. The corner booth, where Eleanor would sit late at night, counting receipts and planning tomorrow's specials. But the restaurant's pristine surface hid deeper currents. The competitive restaurant scene had grown cutthroat. Vincent Foster's development company had been buying up local businesses, replacing family establishments with trendy chains. 3 times he'd offered to buy the Founder's Table, each offer higher than the last. Eleanor would have called it blood money. Arthur reached his office, a small room overlooking the kitchen. Eleanor's awards lined the walls: Best New Restaurant 1985, Chef of the Year 1992, Lifetime Achievement 2020, her last award, accepted posthumously. He settled behind the desk, its surface crowded with invoices, schedules, and the endless paperwork of keeping a dream alive. The morning light caught the frame on his desk: Eleanor in her chef's whites, Arthur beside her at his high school graduation. Her smile radiant, proud. She'd missed his college graduation, too busy in the kitchen. Missed his first executive chef position, his James Beard nomination. But he'd understood. The restaurant had always come first. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Stanley, it was Henry Brooks, his oldest friend and now a detective with Chicago PD. His expression was grave. "We need to talk about those kids you found." Arthur's gaze drifted to the corner of his office, where three small figures huddled on the leather sofa. Julia, her protective stance unchanged since the alley. Simon, silent but watchful. Little Anna, finally warm but still too quiet. "They're not going anywhere," Henry Arthur said firmly. "Not until we know they're safe." Henry sighed, closing the office door. "Arthur, there are procedures. Protocols. You can't just—" "My mother built this place to feed people, to give them shelter when they needed it," Arthur stood, his voice low but resolute. "I'm not turning them away." Through the window he watched his staff prepare for another day of service. The dining room would soon fill with conversations, laughter, the clinking of glasses. But now there was something else in his mother's restaurant, something that transcended business, that spoke to the very heart of Eleanor's dream. These children had found their way to his door, and Arthur Stanley was not a man who believed in coincidence. Eleanor Stanley started with nothing but a second-hand stove and an unshakable determination. In 1985, Chicago's restaurant scene was dominated by men in starched whites, but Eleanor carved her space with flour-dusted hands and 16-hour days. She'd work until midnight, sleep on a cot in the storage room, then rise at dawn to start again. The building that would become the Founder's Table was a derelict diner when she found it. The neighborhood was rough then, but Eleanor saw potential in its bones. She took out 3 mortgages, worked 2 extra jobs, and sold her mother's wedding ring to make the down payment. That first year she served breakfast and lunch alone, teaching herself French cuisine from damaged cookbooks bought at library sales. Vincent Foster entered their lives in 1986. He was younger then, hungry for success. Calling himself a restaurant consultant, he'd offered to help Eleanor expand, to bring in investors. But his help came with strings controlling interest, menu changes, staff cuts. Eleanor refused. "A restaurant is not just about profit," she told Arthur later. "It's about feeding souls." The day she won her first James Beard nomination, Vincent returned with lawyers. He'd bought the building's mortgage, he said. The terms were changing. Eleanor worked 3 months straight without a day off to make the increased payments. She developed her signature apple tart during those sleepless nights, perfecting the caramel shine while watching the sun rise over Chicago's skyline. When Arthur was 12, Eleanor caught pneumonia from working in the cold kitchen after the heating broke. She kept cooking, running on determination and black coffee. Young Arthur would do his homework at the corner table, watching his mother limp between stove and dining room, never complaining, never stopping. The restaurant grew, earned accolades, but Eleanor's focus never changed. She hired staff based on heart, not resumes. She fed homeless people through the back door, gave jobs to struggling single mothers, taught neighborhood kids to cook. "Money comes and goes," she'd say, "but kindness multiplies." Her death came suddenly 3 years ago, a heart attack in her beloved kitchen. Arthur found her beside the prep station, a batch of apple tarts still warming in the oven. The newspaper called it natural causes, but the timing just after another confrontation with Vincent Foster always haunted Arthur. Eleanor left Arthur more than a restaurant. She left him her recipes, her values, and a handwritten letter. The founder's table isn't just walls and tables, my son. It's a sanctuary. Keep it that way. Now, watching the three children huddled in his office, Arthur understood his mother's words in a new way. The founder's table had always been more than a business. It was a place where lost souls could find shelter, where hunger of all kinds could be satisfied. Eleanor would have taken these children in without hesitation, and in that certainty Arthur found his resolve. Julia Mitchell sat straight-backed in Arthur's office chair, her small shoulders squared with a dignity beyond her 7 years. Her dark hair was tangled, but her eyes held a fierce intelligence that seemed to evaluate every movement, every word. When Arthur offered her hot chocolate, she tested it first before letting Simon or Anna drink, a child forced to grow up too fast. "How long have you been looking after them?" Arthur asked gently. Julia's hand instinctively touched the mark on her wrist. "Simon was already there when they brought me. Anna. I couldn't leave her behind. She cried too much, and her voice trailed off, protective even of painful memories." Simon Parker hadn't spoken a word since their arrival. The 4-year-old boy sat cross-legged on the floor, methodically arranging sugar packets in perfect lines. His clothes were two big sleeves covering the marks on his wrists. Only his eyes moved, constantly tracking everyone in the room, cataloguing exits. When the kitchen door slammed, he flinched but made no sound. 2-year-old Anna Carter clutched a worn teddy bear Caroline had given her. She was the smallest, her face still holding baby roundness, despite deprivation. Unlike Simon's watchful silence, hers seemed born of exhaustion. She slept often, curled against Julia like a kitten, whimpering in dreams only Julia could soothe. Caroline Watson appeared regularly through the day, bringing fresh muffins and gentle conversation. Her grey hair was always neatly pinned, her café apron spotless. But there was something in her eyes when she watched the children, a deep sadness, a haunting recognition. She moved with purpose, her kindness structured like a mission. Detective Henry Brooks visited daily, his weathered face creased with concern. 20 years on Chicago's police force had left him cynical, but these children stirred something different in him. He'd been Arthur's friend since college, had attended Eleanor's funeral, knew the weight of legacy Arthur carried. "The marks match other cases," Henry confided quietly to Arthur. "High-end trafficking ring. They brand their merchandise." His voice caught on the last word, disgust evident. Arthur himself had changed since finding the children. The precise, business-minded restaurateur now moved with protective vigilance. His tailored suits remained impeccable, but dark circles beneath his eyes betrayed nights spent watching over his charges. Eleanor's son had inherited more than her cooking skills. He had her heart, her stubborn devotion to helping others. Together, they formed an unlikely family in the founder's table's warm kitchen. Julia's protective fierceness, Simon's watchful silence, Anna's innocent trust. Caroline's structured kindness, Henry's determined investigation, and Arthur's growing understanding that some legacies transcend business success. But in the shadows, other forces were gathering. Vincent Foster's sleek town car had been seen circling the block. The marks on the children's wrists held secrets that would shake Chicago's foundations. And the founder's table stood at the center of a storm about to break. Henry Brooks spread photographs across Arthur's desk like a grim deck of cards. Each showed the same marker triangle with the letter V on different children's wrists. 7 cases in 3 months, he said quietly. All high-end neighborhoods. These aren't street criminals, Arthur. They're organized, sophisticated. Julia watched from the corner, her hand unconsciously covering her own mark. Arthur noticed how she angled herself between the photos and Simon, always protecting. "The victims are usually from wealthy families," Henry continued. "Kids whose parents are too busy to notice they're gone right away. But these 3," he gestured toward the children, "they're different. No missing persons reports match their descriptions." The kitchen bustle filtered through the office door, prep cooks chopping vegetables, servers setting tables. Normal sounds that now felt like a shield against darker realities. Mr. Stanley Sarah interrupted, her face tense. "Vincent Foster is here. He's asking about renovations again." Arthur's jaw tightened. Through the office window he could see Foster in the dining room, immaculate in a charcoal suit, radiating practiced charm as he chatted with the lunch crowd. Regular customers greeted him warmly, unaware of the predatory calculation behind his smile. "Keep the children up here," Arthur told Sarah. "Lock the door." Foster's handshake was firm, his smile pristine. "Arthur, my boy, the place looks wonderful. Eleanor would be proud," he gestured expansively, "though I've been hearing interesting rumors, something about unexpected guests." "Just rumors?" Arthur kept his voice neutral, but his shoulders tensed. "We both know how people talk." Indeed, Foster straightened his tie. "Though in times like these, security is so important. I'd hate to see anything happen to your mother's legacy." The threat lay beneath his polished words like a knife under silk. Arthur thought of the children upstairs, of Julia's watchful eyes and Simon's silent fear. Later that evening, Caroline lingered after closing, helping wipe down tables. "Foster was asking questions at my cafe too," she said quietly. "About the children," he seemed, too interested. "You think he's connected?" Arthur stacked chairs with more force than necessary. "I think nothing in this neighborhood happens without Vincent Foster knowing about it." Caroline's eyes held something Arthur couldn't quite read. "Be careful, Arthur. For their sake." The restaurant staff had mixed reactions to their new guests. Chef Marcus left extra portions at each meal, his gruff kindness showing in pans of mac and cheese that appeared mysteriously. Sarah organized a schedule for watching the children during service hours. But others whispered, worried about legal complications, about Foster's growing interest. Julia observed it all, her young face serious as she helped fold napkins or sort silverware. "He's one of them," she said suddenly one evening, freezing at the sight of Foster through the window. "The man in the nice suit. He visited the place they kept us?" Arthur's blood ran cold. Before he could question further, a commotion erupted in the kitchen. A new server had dropped a tray, the crash sending Simon into a panic. He bolted, knocking over chairs, his small body trembling as he wedged himself behind a cabinet. It took Julia an hour to coax him out, speaking softly in what seemed like a familiar ritual. "The loud noises scared him," she explained, though Arthur suspected there was more to the story. "Where they kept us. Loud noises meant bad things." Oh, that night Arthur called Henry. "We need to move faster," he said, watching the children sleep on the office couch. "Foster came by today." Julia recognized him. Henry's curse crackled through the phone. "Keep them close. I'll expedite the investigation, but Arthur, be ready. People like Foster, they don't like loose ends." After hanging up, Arthur stood at the window, watching Foster's car idle across the street. The founder's table's warm lights reflected in the dark windows, a beacon in the Chicago night. But now that warmth felt exposed, vulnerable. The sanctuary his mother built was becoming a fortress, and Arthur Stanley was its last line of defense. Caroline Watson's real identity unfolded one quiet morning between coffee deliveries. She sat in her cafe after hours, surrounded by case files hidden beneath invoices and order forms. 20 years as an FBI investigator hadn't dulled her instincts or her pain. The photo on her desk showed a younger Caroline with a small girl, both smiling. Emily would be Julia's age now, if she'd ever been found. Her cover as a cafe owner had been perfect, watching, waiting, gathering intelligence on Vincent Foster's network. But these 3 children changed everything. They were the first living witnesses she'd found in 5 years of searching for Emily. Across town, in a modest hotel room, Rebecca and James Mitchell, Julia's parents, pored over their own investigation notes. Their corporate jobs were covers, carefully crafted personas hiding their work with the FBI's trafficking task force. The photo of Julia on their nightstand was 3 years old, taken before they'd sent her into protective custody that had somehow failed. "Foster's making moves," James said, hanging up his burner phone. "He knows Julia can identify him." Rebecca's hands trembled as she sorted surveillance photos. "We were so close to bringing down his network, but now," she touched Julia's photo. "Our baby is right there, James, right there in that restaurant, and we can't even hold her." "Soon," James promised, his voice rough. "Once we have enough evidence, once she's safe." Meanwhile, Vincent Foster sat in his penthouse office, watching the founder's table through binoculars. Eleanor Stanley's death had been necessary. She'd discovered his shipping manifests, started asking questions. Her heart attack had been untraceable, perfectly timed, but now her son was becoming an equal threat. Foster pulled out an old photograph himself and Eleanor as teenagers, before ambition had poisoned everything. Before he'd chosen power over family, his own sister, and he'd ordered her death as easily as ordering dinner. Sir, his assistant, entered quietly. The private investigator's report on Arthur Stanley. Foster scanned the file, his jaw tightening. Bank records, staff interviews, security footage. Arthur was clean. Too clean. But these children, they were a weakness Foster could exploit. Back at the founder's table, Julia sat with Simon and Anna in the kitchen's warmth, teaching them to fold napkins into swans. Her parents had taught her that in another life. Sometimes she thought she saw them watching the restaurant, but she'd learned not to trust such hopes. Julia Arthur approached carefully, noticing how she positioned herself between him and the younger children, always protecting. "Henry brought something for you to look at." The detective laid out photographs of men in suits similar to those Julia had seen in captivity. Her small finger pointed unfailingly, identifying key players in Foster's organization. Each confirmation made Caroline's hand tighten on her coffee cup, thinking of Emily. Later that night, Foster made another appearance at the restaurant. His conversation with Arthur was cordial, threaded with subtle menace. But this time, Caroline watched through her cafe window, photographing their interaction. James and Rebecca Mitchell observed from their unmarked car, documenting every gesture. "The children look well," Foster commented, sipping his espresso, "though it must be quite a burden taking care of them. I know people who could help with that." Arthur's smile was steel. "They're not a burden, Vincent. They're family." Family. Foster's laugh was soft. "Like Eleanor was family? Be careful, nephew. Some legacies are better left buried." The layers of deception deepened like winter shadows. Caroline, hiding her badge behind baked goods. The Mitchells, aching to hold their daughter. Foster, plotting to protect his empire. And through it all, 3 children who held the truth that could unravel everything. "We're running out of time," Caroline told her FBI handler that night. "Foster's getting nervous, and these kids, they're not just witnesses anymore. They're hope." The Chicago Tribune's headline glared from newsstands. "Local restaurant under investigation. Children found in prestigious establishment." The story was carefully crafted, hinting at impropriety while avoiding outright accusations. Arthur recognized Foster's influence in every calculated word. Local news vans circled the founder's table like vultures. Reporters ambushed regular customers, asking loaded questions about suspicious activities. The morning show hosted a Concerned Citizens segment, where carefully selected guests questioned Arthur's motives for harboring the children. "It's a witch hunt," Henry said, tossing the newspaper aside. "Foster's using the media to pressure you, make you look unstable, dangerous." The pressure mounted from all sides. Health inspectors appeared daily, finding minor violations that had never been issues before. The Liquor License Board scheduled an emergency review. Anonymous calls to Child Protective Services flooded in, each suggesting something sinister behind the founder's table's closed doors. Inside, the strain showed. Staff members fielded hostile phone calls and dodged reporters' questions. Regular customers dwindled, unnerved by the constant media presence. Even Chef Marcus's steady hands shook as he plated dishes, watching shadows past the kitchen windows. Mr. Stanley, Sarah's voice wavered one morning. Some parents cancelled their Christmas party bookings. They said they don't feel safe bringing their children here anymore. The first brick came through the window on a quiet Tuesday evening. It carried a note. Child trafficker Arthur swept up the glass himself, his hands steady despite the rage building inside. Julia watched from the stairs, her young face too understanding of adult cruelty. "I'm sorry," she whispered that night as Arthur checked the new security locks. "This is our fault." No, Arthur knelt to her level. "This is Foster's fault. And we don't let bullies win." But the threats escalated. Dead rats appeared on the doorstep. The restaurant's reviews were flooded with false claims of food poisoning. Someone spray-painted predator across the front door in red letters that looked too much like blood. Caroline watched it all from her cafe, documenting each incident, building her case. She saw the unmarked cars that followed Arthur home, noted the men who photographed everyone entering the restaurant. Foster was tightening the noose, but he was getting sloppy in his desperation. The children felt the tension. Simon stopped sleeping, spending nights by the window watching for dangers only he seemed to see. Anna grew quieter, if that was possible, clinging to Julia like a shadow. Julia carried it all with a strength that broke Arthur's heart. "We should leave," she said one night, after another window shattered. "Find somewhere else to hide." Arthur looked at her, this child forced to think like an adult, to carry burdens no 7-year-old should know. "This is your home now," he said firmly, "and we protect our home." The staff began taking sides. Some quit, unwilling to weather the storm. Others doubled down, forming a protective circle around the children. Chef Marcus started sleeping in the kitchen, his military background showing in the way he patrolled at night. Sarah organized a phone tree, ensuring someone was always watching the restaurant. Foster's visits became more frequent, each one carrying veiled threats wrapped in concern. The community's worried Arthur. Children should be with proper authorities, not a restaurant owner. The way he said it made it sound dirty, suspicious. But Arthur remembered his mother's words, sometimes doing right looks wrong to everyone else. Henry brought more disturbing news. Other restaurants that had helped trafficking victims had suffered mysterious fires. Witnesses who'd agreed to testify disappeared. The pattern was clear. Foster was sending a message. But he'd underestimated the bonds forming in the founders' table's kitchen. Every threat strengthened their resolve. Every act of intimidation brought the staff closer together. The restaurant wasn't just a business anymore. It was a fortress protecting 3 children who'd already survived too much. "We're close," Caroline assured Arthur late one night. "Foster's getting desperate. Desperate men make mistakes." Arthur looked at the sleeping children, Julia protective, even in sleep, one arm around Simon, the other holding Anna close. The restaurant's warmth enveloped them, his mother's legacy transformed into something she would have fought for just as fiercely. "Let him come," Arthur said quietly. "We'll be ready." The first breakthrough came during a thunderstorm. Lightning cracked across Chicago's sky, and Simon, who hadn't spoken since his arrival, screamed. It was the first sound Arthur had heard from him, raw and terrified. Julia moved with practiced efficiency, but Arthur reached Simon first. He didn't touch the boy, just sat beside him under the office desk where he'd hidden. "I used to be scared of storms too," Arthur said softly. "My mom would make hot chocolate, extra marshmallows. Said sweet things chase away scary things." Simon's trembling slowed as he listened. Julia watched from the doorway, her usual protective stance softening slightly. "Would you like some?" Arthur asked. "I know where Mom kept the good chocolate." Simon looked at Julia, who nodded almost imperceptibly. In the kitchen, Arthur let Simon watch him make the hot chocolate, explaining each step. "See? Nothing scary in here. Just milk, chocolate, and a little magic." When he added extra marshmallows, Simon's lips twitched almost a smile. That night he slept holding the empty mug. The next morning, as Arthur chopped vegetables with Chef Marcus, a small voice beside him said, "Can I help?" Simon stood there, fingers fidgeting with his sleeve. It was only 2 words, but they were a universe of trust. Anna's trust came through food. She'd been refusing most meals, eating only when Julia fed her. Arthur noticed she watched the baking with fascination, especially the morning bread making. One dawn, he lifted her onto a counter, let her plunge tiny hands into warm dough. Gentle, he showed her. Like petting a kitten, Anna giggled the first time they'd heard that sound as flour dusted her nose. Julia's trust was harder won. She watched Arthur with Simon and Anna, evaluating every interaction, but slowly her rigid vigilance began to crack. It started with the apple tarts. Arthur caught her studying Eleanor's recipe, pinned to the kitchen bulletin board. "Want to learn?" he offered. Julia hesitated, then nodded. While they worked, stories emerged in pieces. "They never let us cook there," she said, crimping dough edges. "Said kids would burn the place down." A pause. "Your mum taught you." "Everything I know," Arthur demonstrated the caramel drizzle. She believed kitchens were for everyone. "She sounds nice." Julia's voice held a question. She was. "Would have loved you 3." Arthur caught the tears in Julia's eyes before she blinked them away. The staff noticed the changes. The children began joining them for family meal, the pre-service dinner shared by restaurant workers. Simon helped polish silverware, his methodical nature making him excellent at the task. Anna became the kitchen mascot, toddling between stations with increasingly confident steps. Julia began letting her guard down in small ways. She accepted Caroline's offer to brush and braid her hair. She fell asleep during prep time, trusting others to watch over Simon and Anna. She asked Arthur questions about cooking, about his mother, about running a restaurant. One night after service, Arthur found Julia at Eleanor's old corner table, a notebook open before her. "What's that?" "Names," she said quietly. "Of the others." "From that place. I remember them all." Arthur sat beside her, careful not to touch the notebook. "That's very brave, Julia." She looked up at him, her young face serious. "You'll help them too, right? Like you helped us." "We'll help them all," Arthur promised, "together." The moment was interrupted by Simon, proudly carrying a plate of perfectly polished spoons. Anna trailed behind him, clutching her ever-present teddy bear. They'd begun moving as a unit through the restaurant, more confident, but still together. That night, for the first time, Julia let Arthur tuck them in. She didn't position herself between him and the younger children, didn't watch his every move. As he turned to leave, her small voice stopped him. "Arthur, thank you for believing us." The words carried the weight of too many who hadn't believed them before. Arthur thought of his mother, who'd built this place as a sanctuary for lost souls. "That's what family does," he said simply. The transformation of the founder's table happened gradually, like seasons changing. Chef Marcus started keeping crayons and paper in his station for Simon's daily visits. The boy would draw elaborate pictures of food, his way of suggesting menu items. Sometimes Marcus would actually create them, leading to specials like Simon's spectacular spaghetti or the artist's choice chicken. Sarah reorganized the office, creating a small reading nook with borrowed children's books. During afternoon lull, she'd read to Anna, the toddler curled in her lap like a small cat. The staff noticed Anna started mimicking Sarah's graceful way of walking, tottering through the kitchen in serious imitation. The regular customers adapted too. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been coming for Sunday brunch for 30 years, brought hand-knitted sweaters for each child. Mr. Peterson, a retired teacher, started tutoring Julia in math during slow afternoons, using recipes to teach fractions. "You're good with numbers," he told her one day. Julia beamed with pride, her first genuine smile in weeks. Caroline's cafe became an extension of their sanctuary. She set up a small table near her kitchen where the children could escape when the restaurant got too busy. My mother's old recipes, she told Julia, sharing butter cookie techniques. But her eyes held deeper understanding, watching Julia protect her small family. The neighborhood rallied unexpectedly. When news spread about Foster's pressure tactics, local businesses formed a protective circle. The hardware store owner installed security cameras for free. The bookshop next door started a children's story hour, giving them another safe space. Even Henry's police colleagues got involved quietly. Squad cars patrolled more frequently. Off-duty officers started taking their coffee breaks at the founder's table, their presence a subtle deterrent. Inside the restaurant, new traditions formed. Every morning, Arthur taught the children something new about cooking. Simon mastered the perfect toast. Anna could crack eggs without shells. Julia learned her mother's apple tart recipe by heart. "Your mum would have loved this," Caroline told Arthur one evening, watching the children help close the restaurant, seeing her place become a real home. The staff calendar filled with small celebrations. Simon's first complete sentence earned a special dinner. Anna's successful potty training was marked with cupcakes. Julia's mastery of pie crust warranted a small ceremony, complete with a paper chef's hat. But it was the quiet moments that truly bound them. Arthur catching Julia teaching Simon to tie his shoes, using the same patience she'd learned from their morning cooking lessons. Simon overcoming his fear of the walk-in freezer because Anna wanted ice cream, his protective instinct stronger than his terror. Anna leaving her teddy bear with Julia when the older girl was having a rough day. Late at night, after service, Arthur often found all three children asleep in Eleanor's corner booth, surrounded by drawings, books, and half-eaten cookies. These moments caught in his throat, the sight of them finally relaxed, finally safe. "They're healing," Caroline observed softly one such evening. "And so are you." She was right. The hollow space Eleanor's death had left was filling with something new, not replacing her memory, but building upon her legacy. The founder's table had always been about nourishing people, now it was nourishing souls. The children began calling the restaurant staff by family titles. Chef Marcus became Uncle Marcus, his gruff exterior melting every time Simon ran to him shouting the name. Sarah was Auntie Sarah, expert storyteller and keeper of band-aids. Caroline naturally became a grandmother figure, her cafe a second haven. And Arthur. Arthur became simply Dad one tired evening, the words slipping from Julia's lips as he carried a sleeping Anna upstairs. The moment froze them both, Julia's eyes wide with fear of rejection. Is that okay?" she whispered. Arthur hugged her close, his voice rough with emotion. "More than okay." The restaurant was changing, becoming something Eleanor could never have imagined but would have deeply understood. It wasn't just a business anymore, it was the heart of a family forged in adversity, bound by love stronger than blood. The first sign of trouble came in a thick manila envelope. Legal documents served to the founder's table, challenging Arthur's custody of the children. The letterhead bore the name of Foster's most expensive law firm. "They're claiming endangerment," Henry explained, reviewing the papers, saying the restaurant is an unsafe environment, that you're unqualified as a guardian. His face darkened. "Foster's fingerprints are all over this." Julia overheard, her small face paling. "They'll take us away." "No," Arthur said firmly, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "Never." The custody challenge was just the beginning. Child services arrived for surprise inspections, documenting every minor violation. The children's sleeping area in the office was deemed inadequate. The kitchen, despite its spotless condition, was labeled hazardous for minors. "They're building a case," Caroline warned, "making you look unfit." Meanwhile, mysterious stories began circulating about Julia's parents. Rumors of abandonment, of negligence. Papers discovered suggesting they'd sold their own child. Arthur recognized Foster's handiwork poisoning the well, ensuring no one would look too closely at the real story. Simon regressed, his newfound voice falling silent again. He spent hours hiding under tables, jumping at shadows. Anna's nightmares returned, her screams waking the whole restaurant at night. Julia stopped eating, her protector's instincts working overtime. The police pressure mounted too. "We can't keep stalling," Henry admitted reluctantly. "Without official guardianship, they'll have to go into the system." The thought of the children in foster care separated, vulnerable to Foster's influence, kept Arthur awake at night. He'd promised to protect them, but the legal walls were closing in. Sarah found Julia one morning, packing small bags for herself and the others. "We should go," Julia explained, her voice trembling. "Before they make us leave. Before they split us up." The girl's words cut deep. She'd learned too young that adults couldn't be trusted, that safety was temporary. Arthur knelt beside her, helping her fold a small sweater. "Julia, look at me. Do you trust me?" She nodded slowly. "Then trust this, you three are family now, and family fights together." But the complications multiplied. The health department threatened to shut down the restaurant, citing violations that hadn't existed a week ago. The bank reviewed their loans, suggesting refinancing at impossible rates. Foster's web was tightening. Even the supportive community began to waver. Parents whispered about safety concerns. Regular customers, faced with persistent questioning from authorities, started avoiding the restaurant. The protective circle was fracturing under pressure. Caroline watched it all from her cafe, her FBI training recognizing the systematic dismantling of Arthur's world. Foster was attacking from every angle: legal, financial, social. It was a masterclass in destruction. One rainy evening, a social worker arrived with police backup. "We have orders to assess the children's living conditions," she announced, her voice professionally detached. Julia grabbed Simon and Anna, retreating to their corner booth. The entire restaurant staff moved as one, forming a barrier between the officials and the children. Chef Marcus stepped forward, still in his whites. "You'll need a warrant for that." The standoff lasted hours. Henry arrived, arguing jurisdiction. Caroline provided character witnesses. Regular customers showed up in support, filling the restaurant despite the late hour. But the reality was clear: they were running out of options. Later that night, Arthur found Julia at Eleanor's old table, holding Anna while Simon slept fitfully beside them. "I remember," she said softly, "when my real parents used to have dinner together, before they got too busy, before they stopped coming home." The pain in her voice made Arthur's chest tight. These children had already lost one family. He wouldn't let them lose another. "Your parents," he started carefully, "I'm sure they—" "Don't," Julia interrupted. "Don't make excuses for them. Everyone always does." She looked up at him, her young eyes too old. "You're our family now. You chose us. That's better than being born family and walking away." Arthur held her gaze, seeing Eleanor's strength reflected in this child's determination. The legal papers on his desk demanded surrender. Foster's pressure promised destruction. The system insisted on separation. But in Julia's eyes, in Simon's trust, in Anna's innocent belief in safety, Arthur found his resolve. His mother had built the Founders' Table as a haven for lost souls. He would defend that legacy, no matter the cost. The complications were mounting, the odds stacking against them. But family wasn't about odds. It was about standing together when the world pushed hardest. The attack came during Sunday brunch service when the Founders' Table was at its busiest. The first brick shattered the front window, sending glass spraying across white tablecloths. Diners screamed, ducking under tables as more rocks followed. "Get the children upstairs," Arthur commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. Julia was already moving, shepherding Simon and Anna toward the kitchen with practiced efficiency. 6 men in dark clothes stormed through the broken windows, They weren't the usual vandals. These moved with military precision, heading straight for the kitchen. Foster's professionals. Chef Marcus reacted instantly, his military training surfacing. He overturned a prep table, creating a barrier. Back door, he shouted to Sarah, who was already rushing the children toward the rear exit. But they'd planned for that too. More men appeared at the back entrance, cutting off their escape. The children were trapped in the kitchen, Julia standing protectively in front of Simon and Anna, her small frame rigid with determination. "Where are they?" the leader demanded, his voice cold. "Foster wants what belongs to him." "The only thing that belongs here is you leaving." Arthur stepped forward, placing himself between the men and the kitchen door. The first punch caught him in the jaw, but Arthur had been expecting it. What the attackers hadn't expected was the restaurant staff's response. Chef Marcus launched himself at two men, years of combat training evident in his movements. Servers grabbed wine bottles as weapons, busboys wielded trays like shields. Caroline appeared from nowhere, her FBI training revealing itself as she took down an attacker with practiced ease. Regular customers joined the fight, Mr. Peterson swinging his cane with surprising accuracy, Mrs. Anderson's handbag becoming an unlikely weapon. In the kitchen, Julia had pushed Simon and Anna into the walk-in pantry, barricading the door with shelving. She could hear the fighting outside, the crashes and shouts mixing with breaking dishes and overturning furniture. "Stay quiet," she whispered to them, her voice steady despite her fear, "like we practiced." Oh, the battle for the founder's table raged on. Arthur took another hit but kept fighting, his mother's words echoing in his mind, "Some things are worth bleeding for." Then, through the chaos, came a sound that stopped everyone: police sirens. Henry had arrived with backup, their timing perfect thanks to the silent alarm Sarah had triggered. The attackers retreated as quickly as they'd come, leaving destruction in their wake. But they'd failed in their main objective. The children were safe, though shaken. As the police secured the scene, Arthur found Julia and the others still in the pantry. Simon was trembling, Anna crying quietly, but Julia stood guard, a small knife from the kitchen clenched in her hand. "It's over," Arthur said softly. "You're safe." Julia dropped the knife, finally allowing herself to shake. "They'll come back." "Let them." Arthur's voice was steel. "We'll be ready." The restaurant was in shambles: broken windows, overturned tables, shattered dishes everywhere. But as Arthur looked around, he saw something remarkable. The staff was already cleaning, customers were helping right furniture, the community rallying together. Caroline approached, her professional mask back in place. Foster's getting desperate. This was sloppy, leaving witnesses, physical evidence. "He'll try again," Arthur said, watching Julia comfort the younger children. "Yes," Caroline's eyes hardened, "but now we have proof of his involvement. The game's changing, Arthur." As the sun set that evening, the founder's table's broken windows were boarded up, but light still spilled out from every crack. Inside, the staff served dinner on mismatched plates, customers sat at scratched tables, and 3 children helped fold napkins in the kitchen. They'd survived the first direct attack, but Arthur knew it was just the beginning. Foster had shown his hand: no more subtle pressure, no more legal maneuvering. Now it was war. The truth about Julia's parents emerged the morning after the attack. Henry arrived early, carrying a thick file and a grim expression. "You need to see this," he told Arthur, spreading photographs across the office desk. The images showed James and Rebecca Mitchell at various surveillance locations around the founder's table, not abandoning their daughter, protecting her. They were FBI agents, deep undercover, investigating Foster's trafficking network. "They had to send Julia away when they got too close," Henry explained, "but the safe house was compromised. Foster had people everywhere." Julia stood in the doorway, having overheard everything. Her small hands gripped the doorframe. They didn't forget me." "No, sweetheart," Henry said gently. They've been watching over you this whole time." That revelation was followed by another. Caroline finally shared her full story with Arthur, explaining about Emily, her daughter, who disappeared 5 years ago. "I joined the FBI to find her," she said, her voice raw. "Every child Foster takes, I keep hoping." The pieces started falling into place. Foster's obsession with the founder's table wasn't just about property, it was about silencing Eleanor Stanley. She'd discovered his trafficking operation using restaurant supply routes. "Your mother confronted him," Caroline revealed. "The night before she died. We found her notes, but it was too late." Arthur sat heavily in his mother's old chair. "He killed her. My own uncle murdered my mother." Simon, who'd been quietly drawing nearby, suddenly spoke up. "The bad man," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He was there when they took us." It was the most he'd said about his captivity. Julia moved to his side instantly, protective as always, but Simon continued, the words tumbling out. "He wore nice suits, gave orders, said we were special merchandise." Anna, playing with her teddy bear in the corner, looked up at Foster's name. "Scary man," she said, clearly her first real sentence. "Hurt Emily." Caroline's coffee cup shattered on the floor. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Anna hugged her bear tighter. She sang songs. Then Scary Man took her away. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Caroline knelt beside Anna, her hands trembling. "Do you remember Emily? What she looked like?" Anna nodded, pointing to a young girl in one of Caroline's photos. "That's her. She was nice." Caroline's sob broke the silence. 5 years of searching, and the answer had been here, in a toddler's memory. As the day progressed, more truths surfaced. Foster's operation was larger than anyone had suspected, using high-end restaurants as fronts across the country. Eleanor had stumbled onto just one piece of it. "Your mother was a hero," Henry told Arthur. "She died trying to protect these kids." Julia, who'd been quiet since learning about her parents, finally spoke. "That's why we came here," she said. "We didn't just escape. We chose this place. The other kids, they said the founder's table was safe, that Eleanor Stanley helped children." Arthur looked around his mother's restaurant, at Julia processing her parents' love, at Simon finding his voice, at Anna holding the key to Caroline's hope. Eleanor's legacy wasn't just in the recipes or the reputation. It was in creating a sanctuary where truth could heal wounds. The revelations changed everything, shifting the battle lines. This wasn't just about protecting 3 children anymore. It was about finishing what Eleanor started, about bringing Foster's empire down. But the morning after the revelations, Arthur gathered his staff before opening. Every face in the kitchen showed exhaustion but determination. The previous night's discoveries had changed everything. "I'm giving you all a choice," Arthur announced. "What's coming won't be safe. Anyone who wants to leave can do so with full severance and references." Chef Marcus stepped forward first, his scarred hands gripping his apron. "Your mother gave me a chance when no one else would. I'm not leaving her fight unfinished." Sarah nodded, standing beside him. "Those children are family now. We protect family." One by one, the staff declared their loyalty. Even the dishwashers, the newest servers, everyone chose to stay. The founder's table had become more than a workplace. It was a battleground for justice. Julia watched from the stairs, Simon and Anna beside her. "We should leave," she said quietly when Arthur found them later. "People are getting hurt because of us." Arthur knelt before them. "Do you remember what my mother used to say about this place?" He gestured around the kitchen. "She called it a lighthouse. Do you know what lighthouses do?" Simon spoke up, surprising them all. "They help lost boats find home." "Exactly. We're not just hiding anymore. We're fighting back. For every child Foster has taken. For Emily. For my mother." The decision carried immediate consequences. The bank called their loans. Suppliers mysteriously cancelled deliveries. The health department scheduled another emergency inspection. Caroline made her own choice, officially revealing her FBI status to Arthur. "I'm dropping my cover," she said. "We're done playing defense." Henry brought more news. Julia's parents wanted to emerge from deep cover to testify against Foster. "But it has to be all of us," he explained. "Every witness, every piece of evidence. One shot to bring it all down." The hardest decision came from Julia. She showed Arthur her notebook, pages filled with names, dates, locations, everything she'd remembered, everything she'd heard while in captivity. "They'll make me talk in court," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Tell everyone what happened." "Only if you choose to," Arthur assured her. The other kids, Julia looked at her notebook. They're still there, still waiting for help, like we were. Simon touched Julia's hand, his small face serious. "I'll tell too. About the scary places." Anna hugged her teddy bear tight. "Me help Emily." The decision was made. The founders' table would become their fortress, their base of operations. Chef Marcus began training staff in basic security. Sarah organized a network of local businesses as lookouts. Regular customers volunteered as extra security. That evening, Arthur sat at his mother's corner table, studying her old photo. "I hope I'm doing the right thing." "Mum," he whispered. Julia found him there, carrying Anna while Simon held her hand. Without words, they settled beside him, a family forged in fire, choosing to stand and fight. Outside, Foster's car idled across the street, a reminder of the danger. But inside the founders' table, light spilled from every window, warm and defiant. They'd made their choice. The real battle was about to begin. The second attack came at midnight, more sophisticated than the first. The power went out first, plunging the founders' table into darkness. Then the phone lines died. Finally, the cell signals jammed, all hallmarks of a professional hit. "Kitchen," now Arthur's voice cut through the darkness. The staff moved with practiced precision, following their emergency protocols. Chef Marcus led Simon and Anna to the walk-in freezer reinforced after the first attack to serve as a panic room. Julia refused to hide, staying close to Arthur. "They're here," Caroline whispered, her FBI training evident in her stance. She'd been sleeping in her cafe, anticipating this moment. The sound of breaking glass came from multiple points. They were breaching all entrances simultaneously. This time, Foster led the attack personally. He stepped through the shattered front door, impeccable in his tailored suit. "Really, Arthur? All this for 3 little strays?" "They're not strays, Uncle Vincent. They're witnesses." Arthur's voice was steady, though his hands clenched into fists. Foster's smile turned cruel. "Witnesses can disappear, just like your mother did." The first shots were fired into the ceiling, warning shots meant to terrorize, but the founders' table was ready. Chef Marcus had military-grade smoke grenades, filling the restaurant with dense cover. Sarah triggered the sprinkler system, adding to the chaos. In the darkness, Julia's small voice whispered locations to Arthur. 2 by the bar. 3 near the kitchen. Her time in captivity had taught her to track movements, to survive. Now those skills were keeping them alive. Caroline engaged 2 attackers with practiced efficiency. Years of FBI training made her movements lethal in the confined space. Henry had positioned snipers on nearby rooftops, their laser sights adding to the intruders' confusion. Foster's voice carried through the chaos. "You're just like your mother, Arthur. Too stubborn to see the bigger picture. This is business, nothing personal." "You killed my mother over business." Arthur's voice shook with rage. "She should have stayed in her kitchen, serving her little meals. Instead, she had to play hero." Foster's footsteps moved closer. "Just like you're playing hero now." A shot rang out, closer this time. Arthur felt the bullet pass his shoulder. embedding itself in the wall behind him. Julia's hand found his in the darkness, squeezing tight. "Last chance, nephew. Give me the children, and the founder's table stays in the family. Fight me, and you'll lose everything just like Eleanor did." The smoke was thinning now. Arthur could see Foster's silhouette, gun raised. Behind him, more men moved in the shadows. They were outnumbered, outgunned. But then Simon's voice rang out from somewhere in the darkness, clear, unafraid. No more hiding. It was the signal they'd planned. The restaurant's lights blazed back on, blinding Foster's men who'd adjusted to the darkness. Local police, secretly positioned throughout the building, emerged from their hiding spots. Henry's team crashed through the windows. Foster's composure finally cracked. He fired wildly, but Caroline was faster. Her shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. As he fell, a paper fell from his pocket, Eleanor's last letter, stolen the night she died. Julia darted forward, despite Arthur's grab for her, snatching the letter before Foster's blood could stain it. Her small face was triumphant as she handed it to Arthur. "Evidence," she said firmly. As the police led Foster and his men away, Arthur unfolded his mother's last words. The letter detailed everything: the trafficking operation, the money laundering, the murders. Eleanor Stanley had documented it all, knowing the risks. She was building a case, Henry confirmed, reading over Arthur's shoulder. That's why Foster had to move quickly. The founder's table was a battlefield, now broken glass, bullet holes, water from the sprinklers soaking everything. But they'd held their ground. Foster's attack had failed. Julia stood in the middle of the destruction, her head high. "He'll try again," she said quietly. Arthur looked at his mother's letter, then at the brave girl who'd helped expose her killer. "Let him try. We're stronger now." The morning after Foster's attack, the Chicago Tribune ran a different kind of headline: "Upscale Restaurant Safe Haven or Criminal Front." The article, clearly influenced by Foster's remaining allies, painted the founder's table as a den of violence, endangering the community. Local news vans clogged the street, their reporters shoving microphones at anyone who passed by. Is it true children are being held against their will? Have you witnessed illegal activities? Should this establishment be shut down? And the neighborhood split into factions. Some longtime residents, remembering Eleanor's kindness, defended the restaurant fiercely. Others, concerned about property values and safety, demanded its closure. "My children used to play here," one mother told the cameras, gesturing at the bullet-scarred walls. "Now look at it. It's become a war zone." The Luxury Business Association, heavily influenced by Foster's friends, revoked the Founders Table's membership. High-end suppliers cancelled contracts. Food critics who'd once praised Arthur's innovation now wrote scathing reviews about a legacy destroyed. Even the staff felt the pressure. Their families, worried, urged them to find safer jobs. Some regular customers crossed the street to avoid the restaurant, turning their faces away when Arthur greeted them. Sarah found hate mail in the morning deliveries. "They're saying we're complicit," she told Arthur, her hands shaking. "That we're helping traffic children instead of saving them." The private school across the street sent a formal complaint, citing safety concerns. Parents clutched their children's hands tighter when passing by. The contrast was stark: these people worried about their children's safety, while ignoring the ones who truly needed protection. Julia watched it all from the upstairs window, her young face troubled. "They're afraid," she observed, as another group of protesters gathered outside. "Fear makes people cruel." The children felt the community's rejection deeply. Simon stopped going to the window to wave at passing cars. Anna cried when people pointed and whispered. Julia's protective instincts went into overdrive, watching everyone with suspicion. But there were unexpected allies too. Mrs. Henderson organized a group of senior citizens to sit in the restaurant daily, their presence a statement of support. Mr. Peterson's teacher friends brought their classes for history lessons about Eleanor Stanley's impact on Chicago's restaurant scene. Caroline's cafe became a gathering place for supporters, sharing information and organizing responses to the negative press. She'd set up a wall of photos missing children connected to Foster's network, reminding everyone what the real fight was about. The local church, remembering Eleanor's generous food donations, spoke out in defense of her son. "The Founders' Table has always been about helping those in need," the pastor declared. "That hasn't changed." But the division grew deeper. One morning, Arthur found red paint splashed across the front door child exploiter that afternoon. A different group painted over it with sanctuary. The restaurant's loyal customers fought back in their own way. They shared stories on social media about Eleanor's kindness, about Arthur's integrity. They organized dinner parties specifically at the Founders' Table, filling the bullet-marked dining room with determined support. Chef Marcus addressed the staff one evening, his military bearing commanding attention. "In war," he said, "you learn who your real allies are. The ones who stand with you when the bombs fall, those are your true family." The children watched the community battle from their upstairs sanctuary. "Why do they hate us?" Simon asked one night, his voice small. Arthur thought carefully before answering. "They don't hate you. They're scared of what they don't understand. But understanding takes courage, and not everyone is brave enough to look past their fear." Julia, wise beyond her years, added, "Like the other kids in that place, some were too scared to help each other. But being scared doesn't make it right." As the division in the community deepened, the Founders' Table adapted. They started hosting community meetings, letting people voice their concerns. They shared Eleanor's letters, helping people understand what they were fighting for. Some minds changed, others hardened, but through it all, Arthur remembered his mother's words: a restaurant isn't just about serving food, it's about nourishing souls. And sometimes the souls that need nourishing most are the ones that fight you hardest. The bank's letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Due to recent events, it read diplomatically, "We are calling in all outstanding loans." Arthur's hands shook as he calculated the numbers. The Founders' Table's accounts were nearly empty, drained by repairs and declining business. Sarah found him in the office, surrounded by bills. "The suppliers want payment in advance now," she reported. "And the insurance company. They're canceling our coverage." The financial bleeding was constant. Every broken window, every cancelled reservation, every legal fee chipped away at Eleanor's legacy. Arthur had started selling his personal possessions, his car, his watches, even his mother's jewelry to keep the lights on. Julia discovered him late one night, tallying bills at Eleanor's corner table. "You're going to lose everything," she said softly, "because of us." The girl's face was thin. They were all eating less now, though Arthur tried to hide the shortages from the children. Chef Marcus had taken to bringing leftovers from his home, and Caroline regularly appeared with extra baked goods. Money isn't everything, Arthur told her, but Julia's eyes were old and knowing. "Your mom worked hard for this place. We're destroying it." The staff felt it too. They'd agreed to pay cuts, then to working for tips only. Some had been evicted from their apartments, starting to sleep in the restaurant storage rooms. Yet they stayed, their loyalty costing them everything. Simon stopped drawing with the restaurant's crayons, hoarding them instead. "For when we have to leave," he explained when Arthur found his secret stash. The boy's words cut deeper than any financial statement. Anna, sensitive to the tension, started hiding food in her teddy bear. For hungry days, she whispered to Julia, who couldn't bring herself to explain that they weren't back in that dark place anymore. Caroline watched her cafe's business suffer too, guilty that her connection to the Founders' Table was dragging down another establishment. "I'm not giving up," she insisted, though her own bills mounted. The personal toll wasn't just financial. Arthur barely slept, jumping at every sound, expecting another attack. His hands shook from exhaustion, making it hard to cook. Dark circles under his eyes aged him years in weeks. Chef Marcus's wife left him, taking their children to her mother's house. "Too dangerous," she'd said. He'd given her his savings, keeping only enough for his daily bus fare to work. Sarah's daughter was bullied at school for her mother's association with that place. She came home crying, begging to move away. Sarah held her at night, singing lullabies, knowing she might have to choose between her job and her child's happiness. One quiet afternoon, Julia found Arthur's mother's recipe book, its pages spotted with tears. "You've been crying," she observed. "Just tired," Arthur tried to smile. "You can let us go," Julia said suddenly. "Simon and Anna, we could try the foster system. You could save the restaurant." No, Arthur's voice was firm despite his exhaustion. Family isn't something you abandon when things get hard. But that night he found Julia teaching Simon and Anna how to escape through the bathroom window. "Just in case," she explained, not meeting his eyes. "So you don't have to choose between us and the restaurant." The moment crystallized everything. Arthur gathered the staff the next morning, their tired faces reflecting his own exhaustion. "I know what this is costing you," he began, "and I need to be honest. We're almost out of money. The bank wants their loans repaid. We might lose everything." Chef Marcus straightened his stained apron. "With respect, sir, we already decided. We're not just fighting for a restaurant anymore." Sarah nodded, though her hands trembled. Those children are worth more than money. The personal cost was crushing them all, but it had also stripped away everything superficial, revealing what truly mattered. The founder's table wasn't just a business being lost, it was the price they were willing to pay for doing what was right. That evening, Arthur found all three children asleep in Eleanor's booth, their faces peaceful despite everything. On the table, they'd drawn a picture, the founder's table, surrounded by stick figures holding hands, their version of family. Looking at their drawing, Arthur finally understood. His mother hadn't built the founder's table to make money. She'd built it to make a difference. And sometimes making a difference meant losing everything except what mattered most. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. It began with a phone call from Child Protective Services, a standard follow-up visit, they claimed. The social worker arrived precisely at noon, properly credentialed, professionally dressed. "Just a routine check," she smiled, but Arthur noticed how her eyes darted around the restaurant, noting exits. Julia, watching from the stairs, immediately tensed. She'd seen that calculating look before. The social worker's questions seemed innocent enough. How were the children sleeping? What was their daily routine? Could she see their living quarters? But each answer was carefully noted, each detail documented with suspicious thoroughness. "And where are their medical records?" she asked finally. "We'll need those for the hearing." Hearing, Arthur's stomach dropped. What hearing? The social worker's smile turned cold. "Oh, didn't you receive the notice? Emergency custody hearing tomorrow morning. Given recent events, the state has concerns about the children's safety." It was a masterpiece of timing. The bank had frozen their accounts that morning. Their lawyer was out of town. Henry was testifying in another case. Even Caroline was away, following a lead on Emily. The social worker produced official-looking papers. "You'll need to surrender the children immediately. For their protection, of course." Behind her, dark sedans pulled up outside the restaurant. Men in suits emerged, looking nothing like typical social services employees. Foster's people wearing government badges. Julia recognized one of them instantly. Her small body went rigid with fear. He was there, she whispered to Arthur. In that place. Chef Marcus moved casually to block the back exit. Sarah positioned herself near the kitchen's panic button. The staff shifted subtly, forming a protective circle around the children. "This isn't a request, Mr. Stanley," the social worker said, her pretense of friendliness dropping. "We have orders to remove these children from your custody, immediately." Simon began to tremble, pressing himself against Julia's side. Anna whimpered, reaching for Arthur. The trauma in their eyes told the whole story. They'd seen this before, adults with papers and badges taking children away. "Show me the judge's order," Arthur demanded, playing for time. He could see Henry's number ringing through on the office phone, unanswered. The social worker produced more documents, but Arthur had learned from his mother to read the fine print. The papers were dated tomorrow, they weren't valid yet. Foster had overplayed his hand. "These aren't in effect," Arthur said firmly. "You have no authority today." The social worker's face hardened. "Don't make this difficult, Mr. Stanley. We can do this the easy way, or—" She never finished. Caroline burst through the front door, FBI badge raised. "Everyone down. This is a federal operation." But it was too late. In the confusion, one of Foster's men had slipped through the kitchen. He emerged holding Sarah at gunpoint. "Nobody move," he ordered. "The children come with us, or she dies." The restaurant froze. Julia's hand found Arthur's, squeezing tight. They'd walked into Foster's trap, and now an innocent woman would pay the price. "But it's your choice," Arthur, the false social worker, said smoothly. "The children or your employee's life. Your mother made the wrong choice. Don't make her mistake." Sarah's eyes met Arthur's, fierce despite her fear. "Don't you dare," she said firmly. "Don't you dare give them up." The moment stretched like glass about to shatter. Outside, police sirens wailed in the distance, too far away to help. Inside, a family forged in crisis faced its ultimate test. In the frozen moment before tragedy struck, Chef Marcus moved first. His military training took over as he launched himself at Sarah's captor. The gun went off once, twice. Marcus fell, red blooming across his white chef's coat. "Uncle Marcus!" Simon screamed, breaking his silence. The boy's voice shattered the stillness, triggering chaos. Caroline sprang into action, her FBI training evident, as she tackled the false social worker. Staff members rushed Foster's men, armed with kitchen tools and desperate courage. Sarah, freed in the confusion, hit her attacker with a serving tray. But Marcus lay still on the kitchen floor, his blood staining the tiles his own hands had polished every morning. Julia pulled Simon and Anna behind the counter, shielding their eyes, but Simon fought to reach the fallen chef. "He needs help," Simon cried, his voice raw with emotion. "Please, he helped us, he needs help." Arthur reached Marcus first, pressing kitchen towels against the wounds. The old chef's eyes flickered open, finding Simon's face. "Stay strong, soldier," he whispered hoarsely. Police sirens grew closer, but Foster's people were already retreating, dragging their wounded. The false social worker escaped in the chaos, leaving scattered papers in her wake. Paramedics arrived to find the restaurant staff circled around Marcus, their faces streaked with tears and determination. Simon refused to leave his side, small hands clutching the chef's larger one. "I had to protect my family," Marcus managed, his voice weak but proud. "Those kids, they're worth it." As they loaded Marcus into the ambulance, Julia stepped forward. "He saved us," she said quietly, "like your mum did. People keep getting hurt because of us." The restaurant was a battlefield. Blood stained the floor where Eleanor's recipes had been perfected. Broken glass glittered where families had once shared meals. The physical damage was nothing compared to the emotional toll written on every face. Sarah gathered the children close, her own hands still shaking. "This is not your fault," she said firmly. "Marcus chose to protect you because you're worth protecting." The staff worked silently, cleaning up the aftermath. Each broken dish, each bloodstain represented another piece of Eleanor's dream scarred by violence. But as they worked, something remarkable happened. Neighbors began arriving. The bookstore owner brought first aid supplies. The hardware store sent cleaning materials. Even former customers who'd avoided the restaurant returned, carrying food and offers of help. Marcus was right, Caroline said, watching the community rally. Some things are worth the sacrifice. But at the hospital, the news was bittersweet. Marcus would live, but he'd never fully recover the use of his right arm. His cooking career was over. Small price he grunted from his hospital bed when Arthur visited. Those kids. They deserve a chance. Eleanor would have done the same. That night, Simon snuck into the kitchen. Arthur found him methodically cleaning Marcus's station, his small hands working with fierce determination. "I'm going to learn to cook," Simon announced. "Like Uncle Marcus taught me, so when he comes back, he'll be proud." Julia joined them, leading Anna by the hand. The youngest child carried Marcus's apron, carefully folded. "We keep it safe," Anna said solemnly, "for him." The sacrifice changed something in the restaurant. Staff members who'd wavered now stood firm. The community's division began healing, united by Marcus's courage. Even former critics fell silent, faced with such selfless devotion. But the price was written in blood on the kitchen floor, in the tremor of Marcus's injured hand, in the nightmares that woke the children crying. Each victory came with a cost, paid by those who dared to stand against evil. That evening, Arthur found Julia at Eleanor's table, writing in her notebook. "I'm making a list," she explained, "of everyone who's helped us, who's gotten hurt for us, so we never forget." The list was long. Eleanor Stanley, Marcus, Sarah, Caroline. Each name represented a sacrifice made in the name of protecting 3 children who'd had nothing but each other. "We remember," Julia said firmly, adding Marcus's name, "and we make it worth it." They came for Arthur at dawn. Police cars surrounded the founder's table, lights flashing in the grey morning. The warrant charged him with child endangerment, assault, and interfering with a child services investigation. "It's Foster," Henry explained quickly as officers approached. "He's twisted everything. The shooting, Marcus, all of it. They're painting you as the aggressor." Julia watched from the upstairs window as they handcuffed Arthur, her small face pale with fury and fear. Simon clutched her hand, while Anna pressed against her side, crying silently. "Remember what we practiced," Arthur called out as they led him away. "Stay strong. Trust Caroline." But Foster's plan went deeper than just Arthur's arrest. Within hours, child services arrived, the real ones this time, with proper documentation. The children would be placed in separate foster homes for their own safety. No, Julia fought as they tried to separate them. "We stay together," we promised. Simon went completely silent again, his recent progress erased by trauma. Anna's screams echoed through the restaurant as they carried her away. The sound would haunt the staff for months. Sarah found Julia's notebook abandoned on Eleanor's table, open to the list of sacrifices. Now they were making the ultimate one. Their family was being torn apart. The founder's table was sealed as a crime scene. Yellow tape crossed Eleanor's front door, marking the death of her dream. The staff gathered on the sidewalk, watching helplessly as their home was locked away. Caroline paced her cafe, making frantic calls. Her FBI credentials meant nothing against local custody orders. She'd failed these children, just as she'd failed Emily. In 3 separate foster homes, 3 children faced their darkest fears. Julia lay awake, listening for signs of danger, no longer able to protect her siblings. Simon retreated into absolute silence, refusing food, his drawings now only showing darkness. Anna cried for Juju and CIC until she made herself sick. Arthur sat in his cell, the charges mounting. Foster's influence ran deep. Witnesses changed their statements. Evidence disappeared. Marcus's shooting was twisted into Arthur's fault. "They're saying you orchestrated everything," Henry reported during a visit, "that you used the children as bait to attack Foster's people, that Marcus was following your orders." The community's faith finally shattered. Long-time customers gave interviews about Arthur's descent into madness. The Restaurant Association formally revoked the founder's table's credentials. Financial vultures circled, waiting to claim Eleanor's legacy. Sarah kept vigil outside the empty restaurant, watching Foster's people come and go, removing evidence, planting new narratives. "We're losing," she whispered to Caroline. "We're losing everything." In his hospital room, Marcus watched the news coverage, his injured hand clenching uselessly. The children he'd taken bullets for were suffering, scattered to the winds. His sacrifice seemed meaningless now. The darkness reached its peak one rainy night. Julia, in her foster home, heard familiar voices outside her window. Foster's men, watching, waiting. Simon, miles away, faced foster parents who saw his silence as defiance, who didn't understand his trauma. Anna, youngest and most vulnerable, cried herself into exhaustion each night. The staff gathered in Caroline's cafe, their last refuge. The weight of defeat hung heavy. Without Arthur, without the children, without the founder's table, they were just scattered pieces of a broken family. "Eleanor would never forgive us, Chef," Marcus said from his wheelchair, "if we let it end like this." Sarah held Julia's notebook, reading the list of sacrifices. "We promised them. We promised we'd protect them." Caroline stared at Emily's photo, then at the empty restaurant across the street. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "the darkest moment comes right before dawn." But in the darkness of that night, with their family shattered and their home taken, dawn seemed very far away. Arthur's mother had built the founder's table as a sanctuary for lost souls. Now those souls were lost again, scattered and broken by the very forces Eleanor had died fighting. The rain fell on empty tables where families had once gathered. The kitchen stood silent where laughter had once filled the air. And in 3 separate homes, 3 children who'd found love and safety watched their world crumble again. The truth surfaced in Eleanor Stanley's apple tart recipe. Police had missed it during their search, this worn index card tucked into the old recipe box. But Sarah, allowed in briefly to collect perishables, recognized the odd measurements for what they were: a code. Eleanor was smarter than anyone knew, Caroline said, examining the recipe in her cafe. "These aren't measurements. They're dates, locations, account numbers." The recipe chronicled everything. Each ingredient listed a different part of Foster's operation. The baking instructions detailed money trails. Even the serving suggestions contained names of compromised officials. She knew Henry breathed, reading the decoded message. She knew they'd search obvious places. So she hid the truth where no one would look in plain sight. Meanwhile, Julia had been busy in her foster home. Years of watching, listening, and surviving had taught her patience. She'd memorized guard rotations, noted weak points. On her 3rd night, she slipped out undetected. She found Simon first. The boy might not speak, but he could still move silently. Together, they worked their way across town to Anna's foster home. 3 children, reuniting in the darkness, drawn by bonds stronger than any foster system. They arrived at Caroline's cafe just as Sarah decoded the final part of Eleanor's recipe. It wasn't just the trafficking, Sarah explained, her hands shaking. Foster killed her because she discovered who really owned his operations. The ownership papers, hidden in Eleanor's elegant handwriting, revealed the truth. Foster's trafficking network was funded by some of Chicago's most prominent citizens. Names they recognized: judges, politicians, business leaders. People who'd recently spoken out against the founder's table. "That's why they wanted us gone," Julia said quietly, making everyone jump. She stood in the doorway, Simon and Anna beside her. We could identify them, all of them. Caroline moved instinctively to protect the children, but Julia raised her hand. "We're done hiding," she said firmly. "We're done being afraid." Simon nodded, speaking his first words since the separation. "Uncle Marcus taught us to be brave." Anna, clutching her ever-present teddy bear, added like Eleanor. The evidence mounted quickly after that. Eleanor's recipe led to bank records, which led to surveillance footage. The children's testimony, matched with the documentation, created an unbreakable chain of evidence. Henry brought more news. Foster's men are turning on each other. the whole network's unraveling. Most damning was the discovery in Foster's own office. Behind a hidden panel, they found Eleanor's real last letter, not the one that had fallen from his pocket, but her true final message. "My dearest Arthur," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Foster discovered what I learned, but I've hidden the truth where he'll never think to look in the heart of our kitchen, in the recipes that built our dream. The children he takes, they deserve better. They deserve a chance. Like I gave you. Don't let him win. Love, Mom." The truth hit Arthur like a physical blow when Henry brought the letter to his cell. His mother hadn't just been murdered, she'd died protecting children she'd never met, fighting a battle she knew might kill her. She made her choice, Julia said softly, allowed to visit with Caroline. Like Marcus did, like you did. The dominoes began to fall. Foster's allies, seeing the evidence mount, turned on each other. Police officers admitted to taking bribes. Judges recused themselves. Politicians suddenly took unexpected vacations. But the most damning evidence came from the children themselves. Julia's notebook, combined with Eleanor's documentation, provided dates, times, faces. Simon's drawings, seemingly innocent, contained details only someone who'd been there could know. Even little Anna's scattered memories helped complete the puzzle. Your mother Caroline told Arthur during a jail visit she built more than a restaurant. She built a case that's going to save hundreds of children. The truth spread like wildfire through Chicago. The same media that had condemned the Founders Table now praised its courage. The community that had turned its back now demanded justice. And in Caroline's cafe, 3 children who'd survived the darkest of places helped bring that truth to light. They weren't victims anymore. They were witnesses, survivors, warriors in their own right. The movement started small, a single candle lit outside the Founders Table's locked doors. Mrs. Henderson placed it there, defying the police tape. For Eleanor, she said simply, and for those children. By sunset, dozens of candles flickered in the growing darkness. People who'd turned their backs now stood vigil, holding lights against the shadows that had almost consumed their community. The local church opened its doors to the restaurant's displaced staff. The hardware store owner offered his warehouse for storage. The bookshop began selling justice for the Founders Table t-shirts, proceeds going to Marcus's medical bills. Remember when Eleanor helped us during the blizzard of '96, one old-timer recalled at the vigil? Kept the restaurant open, fed the whole neighborhood for free. Others shared their stories. How Eleanor had given their children first jobs. How she'd hosted charity events without charging. How the Founders Table had been more than a restaurant, it had been the neighborhood's heart. The media narrative shifted dramatically. Local reporters following the evidence trail published exposes on Foster's network. Headlines changed from restaurant owner arrested to local hero fights trafficking ring. Julia, Simon, and Anna became symbols of resilience. Their story, carefully protected by Caroline, inspired other survivors to come forward. More children emerged from the shadows, bearing similar marks, telling similar stories. The restaurant community rallied next. Chef Marcus, still in his wheelchair, found himself surrounded by colleagues offering support. Top chefs from across Chicago volunteered to help reopen the Founders Table, pledging to maintain Eleanor's standards. But we protect our own, the Chicago Culinary Guild announced, establishing a legal defense fund for Arthur. Sarah organized a phone campaign from Caroline's cafe. Community members called their representatives, demanding action. The flood of calls overwhelmed switchboards, forcing politicians to address the scandal. The neighborhood children made cards for Simon and Anna, remembering them from their brief time playing in the restaurant's courtyard. "Come back," the cards read. "We miss you." Local businesses began displaying photos of Eleanor in their windows, alongside the children's drawings found in the restaurant. The images told a story of family, courage, and resistance against evil. The hardware store's annual Christmas display featured a miniature founder's table, complete with tiny figures representing Arthur, the children, and the staff. Family stands together, read the sign beneath it. Even former critics changed sides. The Restaurant Association publicly apologized, praising Arthur's courage. Food critics wrote retractions acknowledging the deeper story they'd missed. The vigils grew larger. People brought food, sharing meals on the sidewalk like Eleanor would have wanted. They sang hymns, told stories, kept hope alive as justice slowly turned its wheels. Julia watched it all from Caroline's cafe, her young face thoughtful. They remember her now, she said. Eleanor. They remember what she built. Simon, finding his voice again, started sharing his own stories with the vigil keepers. How Arthur had taught him to make toast, how Marcus had shown him knife safety, how the founder's table had given him back his courage. Anna, the youngest, touched people's hearts by leaving her precious teddy bear at Eleanor's memorial. For keeping us safe, she explained. The community's message was clear: the founder's table wasn't just a business, it was their collective legacy, their statement against darkness. They wouldn't let it fall. Foster struck at midnight, one final desperate attempt to destroy the evidence against him. His men, no longer professionals but desperate criminals, stormed Caroline's cafe, where the children had taken refuge. Get the notebooks, Foster commanded, his polished facade cracking. Burn everything. But they'd walked into a trap. Caroline had been waiting for this moment, her FBI team positioned strategically. Henry's police units surrounded the block. Even the local residents played their part, their lights blazing on suddenly, eliminating any shadows where Foster's men might hide. It's over, Vincent Caroline's voice carried through her bullhorn. We have the building surrounded. Foster's laugh held a tinge of madness. You think you've won? I own this city. I own the judges, the politicians. Not anymore, Julia's clear voice cut through the night. She stood in the cafe's doorway, Simon and Anna beside her. We remember everything, and we're not afraid anymore. The sight of the children standing tall, unafraid, broke something in Foster. He raised his gun, but his hands shook. The polished businessman was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. You're just like your mother, Arthur, he snarled, as his nephew emerged from the shadows. Too stubborn to understand business. This was never about business, Arthur replied calmly. This was about family, something you never understood. The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Foster's remaining men, seeing the odds, began laying down their weapons. But Foster himself remained dangerous, unpredictable. I gave her a choice, he said suddenly, his gun wavering. Eleanor. I told her to look the other way. Just like our parents taught us. Don't ask questions, don't make waves. But she couldn't, Arthur said. Because she had conscience. She had heart. Foster's laugh turned bitter. Heart? Heart doesn't build empires. Heart doesn't make you powerful. Heart gets you killed. No, Simon spoke up, his voice steady. Heart makes you strong, like Uncle Marcus. Like Eleanor. The boy's words seemed to hit Foster physically. His gun hand dropped slightly, his eyes showing confusion for the first time. Anna, smallest but perhaps bravest, stepped forward. Bad man, she said clearly. Hurt too many. Stop now. It was this a toddler's simple command that finally broke Vincent Foster. His gun clattered to the ground as he fell to his knees, decades of carefully constructed power crumbling in an instant. The arrest was almost anticlimactic. As police led Foster away, Julia retrieved Eleanor's recipe box from its hiding place. She won, the girl said simply. They all won. The breaking point had come not with violence or dramatic confrontation, but with the simple courage of 3 children who refused to be afraid anymore. Foster's empire, built on fear and silence, couldn't withstand their truth. As dawn broke over the founder's table, Arthur gathered his family blood and chosen in the kitchen. Eleanor's recipes surrounded them, her final battle finally won. "What happens now?" Simon asked, his hand finding Julia's. Arthur looked at the morning light streaming through the windows, at the community gathering outside, at the family he'd found in the darkest of times. "Now," he said, "we rebuild. Together." The courtroom fell silent as Julia took the stand. Her small frame nearly disappeared behind the wooden podium, but her voice rang clear and strong as she told her story. Simon and Anna sat with Arthur in the front row, their presence giving her strength. "Tell us about Eleanor Stanley," the prosecutor asked gently. Julia's eyes found Arthur's before she spoke. "She saved us before we even knew her. She left us clues, evidence. She died protecting children she never met." Foster sat at the defense table, his expensive suit now wrinkled, his empire crumbling as each child testified. More survivors had come forward, their stories matching the evidence Eleanor had gathered. Simon's testimony came in drawings, detailed sketches of the places they'd been held, the faces of their captors. The jury wept when he finally spoke, describing how the founder's table had given him back his voice. Even little Anna contributed, identifying Foster's associates from photos. "Bad men," she said firmly. "No more hiding." The evidence was overwhelming. Eleanor's coded recipes provided financial records. Julia's notebook contained names and dates. Caroline's FBI investigation filled in the gaps. Foster's own people, facing lengthy sentences, turned against him. The verdict took less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. As they led Foster away, he looked older, smaller. The mighty empire builder reduced to what he truly was, a man who'd betrayed his own family for power. "Your sister would be proud," the judge told Arthur during sentencing. "The founder's table will be remembered not just as a restaurant, but as the place that brought down a trafficking network." The dominoes continued to fall. Corrupt officials were arrested, hidden accounts were frozen, Foster's entire network unraveled, exposing decades of crimes. Julia sat with Arthur in the empty courtroom after the verdict, her small hand in his. "Is it really over?" she asked. "This part is," he answered. "Now we focus on healing." The city issued a formal apology. The founders' table's licenses were reinstated. Arthur's arrest record was expunged. But the real victory wasn't in legal documents, it was in the faces of the children Foster could never hurt again. Marcus watched the news from his hospital bed, his injured hand giving a shaky thumbs up. "Worth it," he said simply. "Every scar." The restaurant staff gathered in the kitchen the day the police tape came down. Sarah hung Eleanor's portrait in its place of honor. Chef Marcus, now using a cane, supervised the cleaning of his beloved stoves. "Eleanor's recipe box goes here," Julia announced, placing it carefully on its shelf, "where it can protect more people." The evidence had served justice, but the recipes would serve their original purpose again, bringing people together, creating a sanctuary for those who needed it most. Caroline received word that Foster's files had revealed Emily's location. After 5 years, she could finally bring her daughter home. The circle of justice was complete. As they prepared to reopen the founder's table, Arthur found Julia at Eleanor's corner table, adding one final entry to her notebook. "What are you writing?" he asked. "The end," she said simply. "This story's finished. Time to start a new one." Outside, Chicago's spring sunshine poured through newly repaired windows. The darkness had been defeated not by force, but by truth, courage, and a family's unwavering love. Julia met her parents on a quiet Sunday morning in the founder's table's kitchen. James and Rebecca Mitchell stood uncertainly by Eleanor's old prep station, their FBI badges put away, now just a mother and father, hoping to reconnect with their daughter. "You look so grown up," Rebecca whispered, reaching out but stopping short of touching Julia. "We wanted to tell you. Every day we wanted to." Julia studied them carefully, her protective instincts still sharp. Simon and Anna flanked her, offering silent support. "You were trying to stop them," she said finally. "Like Eleanor." James knelt to her level, his voice rough with emotion. "We thought we could protect you better from the inside. We were wrong. We should have been there." The reunion was gentle, tentative. Julia allowed her mother to brush her hair, her father to hold her hand. But when they suggested she come home, she looked at Simon and Anna, then at Arthur. "This is home," she said firmly. "They're my family too now." Understanding dawned in her parents' eyes. They'd lost the right to be her only family, but perhaps they could become part of this larger one she'd built. Caroline's reunion with Emily came next. The teenager was taller, older, but her eyes lit up at the sight of her mother. "You never stopped looking," she said wonderingly. "Never," Caroline replied, holding her daughter close. "And I found so many others while searching for you." Emily's recovery would take time, but the founder's table became her sanctuary too. She particularly connected with Simon, understanding his silence, helping him find his voice again. Marcus returned to the kitchen, not to cook but to teach. His injured hand couldn't handle professional cooking anymore, but he could share his knowledge. Simon became his devoted apprentice, learning to cook one-handed alongside his mentor. "Family adapts," Marcus explained, watching Simon master a new technique. Finds new ways to show love. The Mitchells moved into the neighborhood, taking an apartment nearby. They joined the restaurant's Sunday family dinners, gradually earning their place in this expanded definition of family. Anna's story held the greatest surprise. During the investigation, they'd discovered her real name, Charlotte Watson. She was Caroline's niece, taken in retaliation when Caroline got too close to Foster's operation. The day Caroline told her sister they'd found Charlotte was another quiet miracle in the founder's table's kitchen. Two sisters reunited, watching their daughters play together, healing decades of pain. But perhaps the most profound reunion was Arthur's. In Eleanor's recipe box, hidden beneath decades of cooking notes, he found one last letter. Not evidence this time, just a mother's love for her son. "Family isn't just blood," she'd written. "It's the people who choose to stay, who fight beside you, who make your table fuller and your heart bigger. Keep our door open, Arthur. Keep making room for lost souls." As spring turned to summer, the founder's table's family continued to grow. Julia split her time between her parents' apartment and the restaurant. Simon's silence transformed into stories. Anna Charlotte blossomed under the love of her extended family. They weren't a traditional family. They were something newer, stronger, forged in fire, bound by choice rather than blood. Their table had enough room for birth parents and chosen family, for healing and new beginnings. Eleanor would have loved this, Caroline observed one Sunday, watching the expanded family share a meal at her old corner table. The healing began in small ways, like flour slowly sifting through Eleanor's old sieve. Every morning, Simon helped Marcus prep the kitchen, his small hands steadier now, his nightmares less frequent. The old chef taught him gentle lessons about more than cooking: patience, resilience, the art of starting over. Sometimes Marcus would say, watching Simon carefully measure ingredients, "The things that break us make us stronger when they heal." Julia started a journal different from her evidence notebook. This one held happy memories, Arthur teaching her Eleanor's apple tart recipe, her parents joining Sunday dinners, the way Simon laughed now. She wrote about the good things, leaving space for more. "It's like making a new recipe," she explained to Arthur. "You keep what works, change what doesn't, add new ingredients until it's right." Anna Charlotte blossomed under Caroline's gentle guidance. Her vocabulary grew, replacing fear with curiosity. She still carried her teddy bear, but now it was a choice rather than a necessity. Each night she helped Caroline bake cookies for the next day's cafe customers. The restaurant staff healed too. Sarah's daughter returned to school proudly, no longer ashamed but boasting about her mother's role in bringing down Foster's network. The kitchen team worked with renewed purpose, each meal a celebration of survival. The community made amends in their own ways. Former critics became loyal customers. Local businesses that had turned away now offered partnerships. The Restaurant Association created the Eleanor Stanley Memorial Scholarship for at-risk youth. Even the building itself seemed to heal. New windows caught the morning light differently, making the dining room brighter. The repaired kitchen floors held memories of both darkness and triumph. Eleanor's corner table, restored after the fighting, became a symbol of resilience. Arthur found healing in continuing his mother's work. The Founders Table began offering cooking classes for foster children, creating a safe space where they could belong. Julia often helped teach, her natural protective instincts channeled into mentoring. "Your mom knew," she told Arthur one quiet evening. "She knew restaurants could save people, not just with food." The Mitchells' healing came through patience and presence. They attended every school event, every Sunday dinner, rebuilding trust one moment at a time. Julia began leaving her bedroom door open at their apartment, a small sign of growing security. Marcus's physical therapy sessions became family events. Simon would demonstrate new cooking techniques he'd mastered one-handed, showing his mentor that adaptation meant growth, not loss. Together they created a new cooking style that worked for both of them. Caroline and Emily started a support group that met in the cafe after hours. Other survivors came, sharing stories, finding strength in community. Anna Charlotte would leave cookies on their table, sweet reminders that healing was possible. The healing wasn't always easy. There were still hard days, triggered memories, moments when the past felt too close. But now they faced these challenges together, their expanded family providing the safety net they needed to risk being vulnerable. Healing Arthur realized, watching his family share a meal at Eleanor's table is just another kind of recipe. It takes time, patience, and love. Lots of love. 1 year after Foster's conviction, the Founders Table glowed with warmth on a snowy Chicago evening. The dining room buzzed with life, every table filled with families sharing meals and stories. Eleanor's portrait watched over it all, her smile seeming warmer somehow. Julia, now 8, moved confidently through the restaurant in her junior chef's coat, personally delivering apple tarts to regular customers. Her parents sat at the bar, watching proudly as she explained Eleanor's recipe to curious diners. She split her time between their home and the restaurant, finding balance in her expanded family. Simon had found his voice completely, becoming the restaurant's unofficial greeter. His stutter emerged only when he was excited, usually while explaining his latest cooking creation to Marcus. The old chef, though retired from professional cooking, still came every day to mentor his young protégé. "Watch this," Uncle Marcus Simon called out, demonstrating his perfect omelette flip. His confidence grew stronger each day, nightmares replaced by culinary dreams. Anna Charlotte, now 3, had become the restaurant's heart. She toddled between tables with tiny plates of cookies, her teddy bear wearing a matching apron. Caroline and her sister shared custody, creating a nurturing environment that helped her forget the darkness of her early years. The kitchen itself had transformed. Where once there had been secrets and shadows, now there was light and laughter. The staff worked with renewed purpose, each meal a celebration of survival and renewal. Chef Marcus's station, though no longer his working space, remained a place of honor where he taught a new generation. Arthur found himself living his mother's legacy in ways he'd never expected. The Founders Table wasn't just a successful restaurant, it was a sanctuary, a school, a home for lost souls. Eleanor's recipes still filled the air with warmth, but now they were seasoned with new stories, new traditions. The corner booth, once Eleanor's private space, had become the family's gathering spot. Every Sunday they all squeezed in together: Arthur, the children, the Mitchells, Caroline and her family, Marcus, and various staff members. They shared meals, told stories, and built new memories. "Look what Simon made," Julia announced one such evening, presenting a perfect apple tart. He did it all himself. Simon beamed with pride as everyone tasted his creation. "I added something new," he explained. "A little cinnamon. For courage." Anna Charlotte clapped her hands, cookie crumbs on her face. "Sweet and brave," she declared, making everyone laugh. Arthur watched his family, chosen and blood, broken and healed, sharing food and love at his mother's table. The founder's table had become everything Eleanor dreamed of and more. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was a testament to the power of love, courage, and second chances. The Eleanor Stanley Center for Children opened its doors above the founder's table on a bright spring morning. The former storage space had been transformed into a warm, welcoming haven where traumatized children could find healing through cooking and community. "Mum always said food heals more than hunger," Arthur explained at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Julia stood beside him, proudly wearing her junior chef coat with assistant director embroidered on the pocket. The center quickly became a beacon of hope. Children from foster homes and troubled backgrounds found their way there, drawn by the smell of baking bread and the promise of belonging. Simon led cooking classes for the youngest ones, his gentle patience helping them overcome their fears. "Everyone drops things sometimes," he'd say, helping them clean up spills without shame. "That's how we learn to be careful." Marcus supervised the older children's culinary program, teaching them skills that could lead to careers. His injured hand didn't stop him from demonstrating technique, and his military background helped him connect with the tougher cases. "Discipline in the kitchen," he'd explain, "teaches discipline in life." Anna Charlotte became the center's unofficial welcome committee, helping new children feel at home. She remembered her own fear and knew how to gently approach the most traumatized cases. Caroline coordinated with local authorities, ensuring the center became part of the official support system for at-risk youth. The FBI even started referring trafficking survivors there, knowing they'd find understanding and purpose. The Mitchells contributed their expertise, teaching self-defense classes and helping children learn to trust authority figures again. Their law enforcement experience, combined with their personal journey with Julia, made them uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between survivors and the system. Eleanor's recipes became more than instructions, they became therapy tools. Children who couldn't express their feelings could knead bread dough, their emotions working out through their hands. Those struggling with control found comfort in the precise measurements baking required. The center's walls filled with children's artwork, cooking certificates, and success stories. Above them all hung Eleanor's portrait, her smile watching over a legacy that had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. "Your mother built more than a restaurant," Caroline told Arthur one evening, watching a group of children learn to make pasta. "She built a foundation for healing." The founder's table and the center worked in perfect harmony, the restaurant's success supporting the center's mission. Regular customers often sponsored cooking classes or donated supplies, understanding that they were part of something bigger than fine dining. Eleanor's legacy had been redefined. What started as a simple restaurant had become a movement, a model for how communities could protect and heal their most vulnerable members. Her recipes still filled the air, but now they nourished more than bodies, they nourished souls. The final piece of Eleanor's legacy emerged during spring cleaning, hidden where only a child might find it. Anna Charlotte, playing hide-and-seek, discovered a loose brick in the old kitchen fireplace. Behind it lay a small metal box, its surface covered in decades of soot. Inside was Eleanor's true masterpiece, a complete record of every child who had ever found refuge at the founder's table, dating back to its opening. Long before Foster's network, she had been quietly saving children, providing jobs, creating new identities, building escape routes. "Look," Julia breathed, turning the fragile pages. "There are hundreds of names." The records revealed an underground network of restaurants across the country, all connected through Eleanor's recipes. Each establishment had served as a safe house, their kitchens offering sanctuary to children in danger. She wasn't just one person fighting alone, Arthur realized. She was part of something bigger. The discovery changed everything. Survivors began coming forward, successful chefs, business owners, teachers, all sharing stories of how Eleanor Stanley had saved them years ago. Each had gone on to help others, creating a ripple effect of rescue and redemption. The final entry in Eleanor's hidden ledger was dated the day before her death. It contained a single line: "The table always has room for one more." Arthur gathered his family: Julia, Simon, Anna, Charlotte, the Mitchells, Caroline, Marcus, and all the others who had become part of their story. Together, they added their own names to Eleanor's book, continuing the legacy she had begun. "This isn't the end," Julia announced, her young face serious. "It's just the beginning." The Founders Table expanded its mission, connecting with other restaurants that shared Eleanor's vision. The center grew, its programs spreading to new cities. Each location used her recipes as their code, her apple tart becoming a symbol of sanctuary. Simon created a special dessert in Eleanor's honor, a delicate pastry that looked simple but contained layers of complexity, just like the woman herself. Because sometimes, he explained, the most important things are hidden inside. Anna Charlotte, growing stronger every day, started teaching other children her age how to bake cookies. "Sweet things chase away scary things," she'd say, echoing Arthur's words from long ago. The final twist in their story wasn't about uncovering more darkness, it was about discovering how much light had been there all along. Eleanor hadn't just built a restaurant, she'd created a legacy of hope that would continue long after her. As snow fell softly outside the Founders Table's windows, Arthur watched his expanded family share a meal at his mother's corner table. Julia teaching younger children Eleanor's recipes, Simon creating new dishes with Marcus, Anna Charlotte distributing cookies with determined joy. The restaurant hummed with life, love, and the promise of more stories to come. Eleanor's last message hadn't been in her recipes or her hidden records. It had been in the simple truth she lived: that family isn't just about blood, that healing comes through helping others, and that there's always room at the table for one more lost soul finding their way home. What touched you most about the Founders Table story? Was it Eleanor's secret mission to protect children, Arthur's unwavering dedication, or the children's incredible courage? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear which part of this journey moved you the most and why. Perhaps you have your own story about chosen family or standing up for what's right. If these kinds of meaningful stories resonate with you, join our community by hitting subscribe and the notification bell. We're committed to bringing you more powerful stories that remind us of humanity's capacity for courage, love, and redemption. Every day we'll share new tales that touch hearts and inspire change. If this story touched your heart, consider sharing it with someone who might need a reminder that hope exists even in the darkest places. Every share helps spread the message that family isn't just about blood, it's about the people who choose to stand beside us when we need them most. Together we can inspire more people to open their hearts and make room at their own tables for those who need it most.